Hello and welcome to a Sunny Book Nook. Today I am bringing to you my August wrap up. I read 21 books this past month and that's pretty good for me, kind of, I guess. I don't know. It's been kind of a slow reading year. I've talked about this already, but this month I was a little bit more on top of it, I would say. I was checking, and last year's August wrap up, I read 26 books, and a lot of those books were my favorites of the year and like just really good books that I really enjoyed reading. So I'm like, that's a fun precedent to have been set because I think I read some really great books this month or last month, I guess, and some pretty good books, some books that were solid but not like new phase, and some books that were like gave me complicated feelings. I don't know how I feel about them, and I'll talk them through with y'all, obviously. Let's just get into it. As usual, I'm going through these in the order that I read them, so from the beginning of the month till the end. So the first book that I read in the month of August. Ugh, my wrist's cracking again. My wrist is always fucking cracking in these videos. First book that I read, Breaking and Entering by Dawn Gillmor. This book I rated 2 stars. So we started off the month with a bit of a flop. Okay, I listened to this book via the Libro FM program, and I have an affiliate link if you want to download that and get Libro FM if you don't have it already. It's basically like Audible if it wasn't evil. You know, supports local bookstores with every purchase of an audiobook. You can have a membership with it, or you can buy individual audiobooks, that situation. Anyways, I listened to this book through the Libro FM influencer program, and yeah, no, I did not really fuck with this. Breaking and Entering is a literary fiction novel following this sort of like middle-aged woman whose husband is a professor, and she kind of has like a suspicion that he's like having an affair or something like that, or like their marriage is kind of mid. Something's not, she's not really satisfied with her life. She's having family issues, and essentially she's like dealing with the drama of this. And also, she lives in this city. I forgot whether it gets specified what city it is, but like she's seeing the changing city and the heat and the sticky heaviness of it, I feel like, is a big part of this book. And she just gets into this hobby of like breaking and entering. She starts getting into like lock picking and joins like a lock picking club, and that sort of leads to her doing breaking and entering stuff. She befriends one of the younger dudes who's just like a nerdy guy who is in the breaking and entering group, or not the breaking and entering group, the lock picking group, and she starts just randomly breaking and entering into people's houses, and it's like cool, I guess. Hold on, I'm getting a little sweaty, so I might have to be a claw clip bitch. To be honest, I love to clip my hair back. I just found that a lot of this book and like a lot of lines of this book were, and the perspective of our main character was kind of just racist. Like, there would just be comments and things said and perspectives taken and expressed that I was like, that's just racist. Like, and it didn't seem like there is anything meaningful or purposeful behind it. It was just there, and I was like, okay, well, sure. So yeah, I don't know, wasn't really that engaged with it, and I kept on getting thrown off by the racism, so it was a 2-star read. Not that memorable. I thought that it was disappointing because I thought that it was going to have more potential than it did. I was like, oh, a literary fiction novel about a woman who's like unwell and, just breaking into people's houses like for funsies. That sounds fun. But no, I mean, it was written by a dude, so. The next book that I read was Dykette by Jenny Fran Davis. And this book it was really funny, okay? I found it kind of delightful, but I think that a lot of people might dislike it, or I mean, it has a pretty low average rating on Goodreads. One of my friends who read it really disliked it, But I liked it. I rated it 4 stars, maybe even 4.5. Like, I thought that it was very chaotic and immersive in the way that, like, any story about following the messiness of the love and social lives of dykes is gonna be, you know? I mean, the concept of this story is that we're following this, like, three sets of lesbian couples going to this, like, cabin in, like, upstate New York for the holidays, Christmas to New Year's. And they're all sort of more upper middle class, New York City, millennial type dykes. And it's just kind of hilarious, I guess. We're following from the perspective of our main character, Sasha, who is definitely a self-insert for the author Jenny, because Jenny Fran Davis wrote an article called High Femme Camp Antics a few years ago, and our main character in this book talks about writing an article called High Camp Femme Antics, the ensuing, like, Twitter discourse and stuff that followed. And so she's obviously a self-insert main character, and Sasha is going on this, like, trip thing, this getaway situation with her butch boyfriend who uses he, him, or she, her pronouns, I think, named Jesse. And at the very beginning of the novel, Sasha overhears Jesse talking with his Zoom therapist about his relationship with Sasha and being like, I don't know, like, saying, like, negative things, essentially. And Sasha just never really confronts Jesse about it. And Sasha's also really, like, concerned with and focused on the fact that one of the other femmes who's going on this trip with them is named Darcy. And Darcy is this, like, kind of Instagram chic type Eastern European girly with, like, a vague accent who she knows that Jesse is, like, kind of into. And Jesse's a photographer and, like, kind of an artist in that way. And the people that she's going on this trip with are all sort of kind of creative. One of them is this therapist who has a podcast. One of them is, like, a talk show host type person. One of them owns, like, a homeware boutique that's really popular and trendy in Brooklyn. And just hijinks ensue. Essentially, there's, like, a sauna involved, but there's just, like, snow. Everyone has their pets, or at least, like, Sasha has her little pet dog, and someone else has their pet dog. It's very, like, the queer ultimatum, kind of, but, like, classy. I don't know. It was very much, like, femme butch bullshit. Like, it was just this elevated unseriousness that I found so entertaining, because our main character, like, Sasha, was just so comedically, like, real. Like, she was such a femme. Like, she like, makes this, like, comedic, she makes this, like, little joke about how she's, like, straight for butches, like, a wink. And all of the different characters and stuff all, like, really are invested in and reference butch femme history and culture in this routine and casual way. But there's also this, like, focus on, like, this dynamic sexuality and the potential cheating or, like, you know, complexity of these different relationships within this contained space and time that is really interesting. And, like, the way that our main character assesses others and, like, thinks about and reflects on her relationship with, like, Jesse and with other people, and what she thinks about different things and, like, social media and stuff. It feels very of the time and of the present. And I don't know, I think, like, this was a book that really did it for me and made me just like LOL. Like I was laughing out loud so bad at so many points because I either felt like called out or thought it was absolutely absurd what was happening, or like I was just like, oh my god, that is so, like, of course that's happening. Like it's, you know, when you watch when you watch something unfold and you're just like, of course, because that's how lesbians act. Like that's literally how they act. Like that's how butches are, you know? And it's, I don't know, I found it silly and I liked it a lot. So yeah, just like literary fiction about people with weird relationships to each other. The next book that I read was How Can I Help You by Laura Sims, which I rated 3 stars, but actually looking back on it, I would probably rate 2.5 stars because I don't think that the writing was like good really. Because basically it's about this woman who works at a library. She's like hiding a dark secret from her past, and then we get this other perspective of this new woman who just like moved away from the city, away from her boyfriend who she doesn't really like but hasn't broken up with, and she starts working at this library, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere-ish. I mean, I think it's like just in a suburb of New Jersey or something, I don't know. And shit goes down because the character who just starts working in this library is like a failed novelist. Like she's a writer and she wants to be a successful author, but it's just not happened yet. And then our other character has this enigmatic like charm to her almost, and they become like drawn to each other, and it's interesting what unfolds. It's kind of like just a thriller in that way, but more psychological somewhat. And yeah, I don't know. I thought it was fun. Like it was a quick read, and it was just, you know, about these women who are like librarians, but are they really? I think it was written very simplistically, and it did the job. It was quick, it was whatever, and nothing to write home about, I guess. And then I read this science fiction novella called The Two Doctors Gorski by Isaac Fellman. And to be honest, I don't really remember anything about this. Okay, actually, I just reread the synopsis, and it's about this woman who is like a PhD student, and she's studying some sort of like magic, and she's trying to do magic, but she's not slaying, I guess. And like she has this bad reputation from this previous professor that she was working under, and now she's transferred and working under a new professor, and it's like the drama that unfolds with that. But again, not too memorable, kind of interesting, very like magical dark academia, I would say. I don't know, I rated it 3 stars. Actually, it's probably more fantasy, but kind of light on that. It's more of a focus on the academic setting and world a bit, I would say. And then the next book that I read was The Choice by Penny Hancock, and I rated this 2 stars. I really did not give a fuck. It is about this woman, or it's from the point of view of this woman who lives in like the north of England or something like that. She's a relationship therapist. It's like a small town. She knows everyone. Everyone knows her. She lives in this beautiful house that she inherited. Everyone thinks she has a perfect life. She has 3 kids, but one of them has been like no contact with her whole family for many years, and we sort of like follow what happened and basically what happens when shit changes. Basically one day she forgets to pick up her grandson because her oldest daughter had a kid with this guy that actually like gambled away all their money, and so now they're not together anymore. She's moved not back in, but at the house near, like in front of her mom's house, our main character's house. I mean, I don't know. I think like it felt almost like it was trying to be like a family or like a thriller type thing at first. I thought is what it was trying to go for, but then I realized it was just like a family drama, and I was like, well, that's somehow even more uninteresting. Like, I felt maybe there was supposed to be some sort of like, I mean, there was a bit of a twist, but it's like, okay, but I really don't give a fuck still. I don't know. I just found it kind of middling. as a story. And I felt like the writing just was very showing and not, or was very telling and not showing almost. And like so much of the story and the relationship between the people relied on them over communicating over conflicts that have been festering over like a lack of communication for years. And it's like, okay, what? And then we finally have a huge massive win, a major win, a 5-star read, and that is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I ate this up. This is like kind of like cozy fantasy if it was high stakes. I don't know. Cott Reads a Lot recommended this on her Instagram and basically compared it to like The Princess Bride meets something else, and I was like, sure, I'll check it out. And then I did, and then I was like staying up all night to read it because I was absolutely delighted, and I ate this up, you know, like it was so good. I really liked this, and after I finished this I was like, oh, I need to read more books that are just like this. And you'll see henceforth the fantasy kick I was on after reading this. But this is sort of like a young adult fantasy because we're following this teenage girl named Tress, who is of the Emerald Sea. And the sea in this world, in this universe, isn't actually like an ocean. It is this very dangerous type of substance that, like, if any sort of liquid water touches it, it will like explode kind of and kill you. So she lives on this tiny island where the king forbids anyone from leaving ever in order to keep people force people to stay there. And she has a semi-romance with the king's son who like pretends to not be the king's son, and he acts like he's not, even though she obviously knows that he is, but he pretends, and he thinks that she doesn't know. Anyway, so Tress is just like your normal average girly. Him and the king end up leaving the island to go meet with other kingdoms to see which princess he could marry. And then he like mysteriously like disappears, and no one knows where he is essentially, and the king comes back with like a replacement son. And she's like, what the fuck? And so Tress is like, well, I have to go find him. And so she embarks on this journey to find the love of her life and to save him. And there's a little rat friend that helps her along the way, kind of, that she finds on a boat. Because obviously she has to get on a boat to get out of there. But then the boat gets like attacked. She gets on this pirate's ship. She tries to survive being a pirate. We see like everything that happens. Most of the story being of her being on this ship, trying to survive on the ship. But it was such a delight. I think that the magic of this universe, was just so engaging and high stakes and well explained and thorough. And I thought that like the voice of the narrator was really delightful. And I think that the way that this book sort of plays into the larger universe of Brandon Sanderson's like Cosmere was like, you can read this on its own without knowing anything else about the rest of the world, because Tress doesn't know anything about the rest of the world, and that's what the story's ultimately about the rest of like the Sanderson universe and the Cosmere and like the Mistborn world and whatnot. Like, I haven't read all of those books and stuff either. It was a delight, I think, and it was truly, truly so adorable, but also like high stakes. Like, I was biting my teeth being like, girl, like, please survive this. I really hope that like it doesn't get you. Like, let the monsters leave her be. Like, let her and her friends and her crew like survive and fuck her enemies, and I hope that bitch fucking dies. Like, it was really, really cool. I think all the different magical creatures and like just manifestations of magic that we encounter in this was really, really fun as well. And this like heroine's journey and her developing this like strength and belief in herself and, you know, growing out of like her ordinariness, I just love stories like that, you know? Like, I love when, like, a normal girl goes through stuff and then becomes a spectacular girl. Because that's who she was all along. And yeah, so sweet and so lovely. I had such a good time with this. After reading this book, I was like, well, let me go see what books are like this and, you know, try to get something that can like fill my book hangover or whatnot after that one. And I ended up going on like Storygraph and trying to search like comparable titles or something like that, or like just Googling comparable titles. And I landed on Swordheart by Kingfisher, which was a flop. I rated it 2 stars. Kingfisher, I just think is not a writer for me. Pour moi. Like, I just don't really think I don't think her writing's gonna hit. Like, I think I've read like 3 of her books at this point, at least, and I've not liked any of them. This one, I thought, it's like, okay, you're not a YA romance fantasy because our main character is like in her 30s. We still have that trope of like the dude who's the love interest is like thousands of years old or whatever, like hundreds of years old. And essentially our main character at the very beginning of the book, at first I thought that it was going to be fun and interesting because she gets locked in her room by like her family members because she just died and inherited her uncle's fortune or something like that. The family member that took her in after her first husband passed away, so she's like a widow. Basically her family member like really wants her to get married to the son, so like her annoying ass shrieking witch of an aunt has a son who is like clammy handed and a bitch boy, and she gets locked in her room until she agrees to marry this kid or this guy. And she's like, fuck no, I don't want to do that. I'd rather kill myself. And so she's like about to kill herself with this random sword that's in the house because the guy that died and like who left the castle house manor to her was like a collector of rare and antique items. He was kind of just a hoarder basically, but so there just happens to be this like decorative sword in the room, and she's like, okay, yeah, like I guess I'll just try to kill myself with this, there's no other option. And so as she tries to do that, this guy pops out of the fucking sword and is like, yeah, so you can't do that. Now you're the bearer of the sword and I'm supposed to protect you with my life. And so then they go on this whole like adventure essentially where she tries and goes to go somewhere, to see someone, to do something, to whatever. Anyways, I was like, right. I rated it 2 stars. I found it kind of lacking, I guess, after the beginning few scenes, and then the ending. I feel like a lot of what was in between felt kind of muddled for me, and a lot of the story just felt kind of like bullshit that just sort of existed for the purpose of these 2 characters being able, like, so much of it was like, oh, but he's like so hot, like he's so hunky, like shut the fuck up, I don't give a fuck. That was kind of disappointing after I read a really great and sweet and adorable fantasy. I just wanted something that was like kind of like that, and it didn't really work. You know, sometimes romantasy just hits, other times it just doesn't work. And I think it also really has to do with like the magic of the world. And I think because the magic of this world really relied upon the sword, which was the guy, I need something that has more intensive world building than that. I feel something that has higher stakes and isn't just about the relationship. Like, we see too much of the relationship. I'd rather have that shit be off screen or be, I mean, I guess. And I think, like, the third act, not even third, like, the very 10% end, like, conflict nature of their relationship, I was just like, okay. And, like, I didn't care. But anyways, well, the next book that I read was a nonfiction read, The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, which I read for Roisin's Readings Big Book Club, and we're doing a live show for this. I vlogged reading this as well in my most recent reading vlog, And I really, really like this. I thought that it was so informative, so excellent, so interesting and engaging, well written, simple, straightforward, and terrifyingly concise and to the point in the way that Klein just articulates exactly how disaster capitalism, imperialism, warmongering, and the networks of like the IMF and the World Bank and the fucking US State Department sort of and the Department of Defense exist to bolster and reify and fund the machinery of relentless pursuit of like free market capitalism in order for a few people to profit at the expense of the lives of like millions, if not hundreds of millions. And it was horrifying, but so well researched. This is the type of book that it's very, a lot of people have read it, and I think more people should read it because a lot of people have read it because it's good and because you should read it, and a lot more people should read it because you should read it. I think like this has a good way of connecting the ideology of like the free market with the consequences of like the actual violence that it entails, like what it actually means to try to implement that, how it doesn't work, why it doesn't work historically, what it's always meant and looked like, and what war and the consequences of climate crises and just moments of like natural disasters of like hurricanes and stuff also create perfect pockets and bubbles of, you know, attempts for constructing like this free market paradise or whatnot, and like the consequences of that, the fallout of that. It's really, really sad to see. And looking at everything from like Chile to Iraq and Afghanistan to Russia and fucking New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, like, I don't know. It was very, very good. And then the next book that I read was another Brandon Sanderson, because I was like, well, if that fantasy didn't really work for me, I guess I'll return to this specific author. And I've historically liked everything he's written that I've read, except for I DNF The Way of Kings, because I don't give a fuck about war. I'm sorry. Anyway, the book that I read was Elantris, which I think was his debut novel. And in some ways it shows, but in others, I think it just represents and embodies how much of his writing and ideas come from like a similar blueprint or like map of like an original magic system, or a magic system that's sort of like a spin on an idea of something that exists out in the world, of something that a lot of people have considered. Like, basically in Elantris, there's this kingdom. And in this kingdom, there's this walled off area called Elantris. And Elantris used to be like a kingdom of gods. They used to like glow and be able to perform miracles and healings and just create food out of nothing, basically. And like create light and just glow everywhere. But then suddenly, like 10, 20 years ago, all that magic disappeared. And now Elantrians are essentially lepers. Like, they are just rotting corpses that can't really die, almost, or like kind of zombies. And basically, as is with the Elantrians of the past, like when Elantris was a city of gods, people would get randomly turned to be an Elantrian. Like, you just wake up one day and be like, oh, well, I guess I'm a god now, and go move into the city. Same shit happens after the destruction of this city, or not the destruction of the city, but it being walled off and being like the place for the lepers, the Elantrians now, who are just gray rotting corpses. Like, you wake up one day and you are a gray rotting corpse, and everyone's like, okay, well, you're getting shipped off to Elantris. Basically, our main character is the prince. At the very beginning of the novel, he wakes up and he's an Elantrian. Boo-hoo. we also get the perspective of this princess who is from like a neighboring or far off kingdom with like a really strong naval base, who is getting sent to meet the prince to marry him. They've been like engaged, they've been exchanging letters and whatnot and chatting, and she comes to marry him, but when she arrives, he died. He's an elantrian, but you know, the court is trying to cover it up because it's kind of a shameful thing to happen for you to be an elantrian. I mean, it's totally at random. Our other main character, the princess, arrived and is like, okay, well, I guess I'm a widow. And so she tries to uncover what the fuck is going on from within the court and like tries to consolidate power. So we get that element of it. But then we also follow the prince as he gets into the city of Elantris and sees how everyone is starving constantly, how there's these different like gang factions and how it's so dirty and fucked up there. And he's like, okay, well, maybe I should start changing this. So he starts trying to implement some change there. And then of course Miss Princess is trying to implement some change within the city. There's some sort of shit that's going down, in which we also get the perspective of this priest who was sent to the city to convert the kingdom, because if he doesn't convert the kingdom within 3 months, basically the rains and fire of like hell from the empire are gonna take over. This empire has been expanding and like conquering different kingdoms all around, and it's like encroaching onto this kingdom, and basically is saying that if you don't convert to this religion, we're gonna destroy you and take you over as well. I think like religion and the sanctity of being able to practice one's own religion for the prince, the princess, and then this priest who's trying to convert people away from those religions is something that's important and an integral part of the storyline, as well as like these different encroaching empires, the relationship that these different kingdoms have with each other, the alliances and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I think like it was very detailed and thorough and interesting, and the character dynamics and the betrayals and the reveals and all of that. I'm like, I see the mechanisms by which Sanderson works now. Like, if this is the first book that he wrote, I understand how we got from there to like Mistborn, you know, and I see from there how we got from like this to like Tress of the Emerald Sea. Even it's all so original almost, and it's all such like different magical worlds, but it all comes from this like, and different characters and stuff, but it all comes from this like baseline, like characters who feel like people who are trying their best, or people who are evil, but like, you know, we're seeing what's more to them. Oh, also I didn't mention this, but like, look how fucking beautiful the inside of this is. Oh yeah, Tress has a hobby, and her hobby is collecting cups. Isn't that so sweet? Look at this illustration. How gorgeous. And there's her rat companion. I think this was originally self-published, but now it's published by Tor because it's excellent, you know? Anyway, so Elantris, I really liked it. I think I started reading it like years ago, and then I just put it down. But then I picked it up again because I was just in that mind space of like, I really want to read a fantasy that like I know I'm gonna like. And so, you know, returning to a Sanderson. And I did. Of course I did. I really fucked with it. So, yeah. The next book that I read was The Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. And I know that Robin Hobb is like a titan of fantasy, and I understand why, because Assassin's Apprentice was really good. I rated it like 4.5 stars. The book follows exactly what you would expect, which is an assassin's apprentice and like what he goes through living in this castle. He's a bastard son of a prince, and he gets, you know, picked up to work under the stable master guy, and they form this like very close bond and relationship. But our main character has this ability to connect with animals and like share a mind with them almost. And so he has this power, but it's not seen as like a good thing. It's seen as something that needs to be hidden, and it's like a gross bad thing. We just see his life over the course of like childhood to adulthood, and he's writing this from the vantage point of being older and being like, when I was a child this happened, blah 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 blah. And so I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that like the whole narrative of the story felt almost like comforting and like warm and inviting, but also so high stakes. Like, he's an assassin. His job is learning how to kill people and then also killing people. And he's in a fucking castle and with people who have a lot to gain from like killing him because he's a bastard. And there's of course the court intrigue and court politics of it all that are a huge element of this book. And yeah, I mean, I really liked it. I thought it was really interesting. I'm excited to finish this trilogy. The next book that I read was another book that I filmed reading in my reading vlog, and that is How to Wrestle a Girl by Venita Blackburn. This is a short story collection that reminds me a lot of Shit Cassandra Saw, in that it's also like a feminist sort of short story collection that is a lot of like vignettes. I would also say that this book is very, very lesbian and queer and very black. Like, it's very much rooted and grounded in the Black American and Black female experience in queerness and in the connections and difficulties therein. But it's not an examination of like racism or like sexism necessarily. It's just more of like the existing within. And it's obviously written by someone who has like a deep investment in Black literary tradition, in feminist literary tradition. There are somewhat speculative elements to different stories of these, and there's a lot of playing with form that happens. There's like, and you'll see this if you watch my reading vlog, there's like a crossword puzzle short story, there's a quiz short story, there's a lot of short stories towards the end that are all interconnected and focus on the life of one girl and her experiences with grief and family. And I think like this short story collection is really much focused on like relationships and like our friendships and family dynamics and lovers and such. I mean, what literature is not, but I think this short story collection examines those within these little snippets and glimpses in a way that feels original and fresh and interesting and inviting, but also it feels very singular almost. So yeah, would recommend this. And then I read a young adult middle grade fantasy called Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede. And I rated this 4 stars because it was just so sweet, adorable, cozy, lovely, amazing. I read 3 books in this series. I think it's ongoing. It has like 4 or 5 books in it. I read the first 3 books in this series because I thought they were delectable. Okay, I think that the first book is my favorite because we follow this princess as she doesn't get captured by a dragon. She's bored with princess life. She's like, this is fucking stupid. I don't want to do this. I don't feel like embroidering and shit. Like, I'm bored of that. I want to do something that involves like being in the world and stuff. And so basically she becomes this dragon's princess. So like she accompanies this dragon and like helps her out and whatnot. And we just follow her life there. And then in the subsequent books, we basically see, I mean, no, I can't talk about the other books without spoiling the first one, but it was just so adorable. The second book I found less interesting because each story follows a different perspective of one of the characters. The first one being the princess, the second one being this king of the forest, this enchanted forest, the third being this witch who can like speak to her cats, which I thought was like really, really cute and fun. And yeah, I mean, they were all great. I think I rated the second book Searching for Dragons. So the first book is Dealing with Dragons. Second book is Searching for Dragons. I rated like 3.5 stars. And then Calling on Dragons was the third book, which I rated 3 stars. I thought that one was a bit more muddled, kind of. So yeah, I would continue with the series because I think it's really, really cute. Then another book that I read in my reading vlog was Get in Trouble by Kelly Link. This is another speculative fiction short story collection. Very heavy on the speculative. It's very, very weird and strange. And there were short stories in here that I found very compelling and others just not so much. Others were just confusing and strange in a way that I was like, what the hell is happening? I don't feel like trying to get that, so I'm moving on. But a lot of these I was like, I really liked. I would say that my favorites are, I really like The Summer People and I really liked The Lesson. But the other ones were just, I don't know, some of it worked for me, some of it not, but I feel like this is 3.5 star collection for me. I liked her other short story collection, Black Fox, White Cat, Black Dog, White Cat, was it? I like that one a lot more, I think. But A lot of these stories are like pretty dialogue heavy. I feel like I've noticed that with Kelly Link's writing. And yeah, I would read whatever else she publishes for sure. Because even though this isn't my favorite, I still liked it. I still had a good time. And then over the course of 2 days, I read like 4 science fiction fantasy novels or novellas that were all very good. And the first one was this 5-star read of the year, of the month. And it was Desert Creatures by Chronister. I loved this book so much. I was on the edge of my fucking seat with every fucking chapter. Like, it was unreal. This is dystopian science fiction meets horror, like body horror, grotesque, just fuckery in the best way possible. It feels very Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Annihilation the movie, like, ugh, with the strangeness of it all. It feels very like Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler even. It was crazy. We follow our main character, who is, at the very beginning of the novel, a little girl who is running away from a community with her father. And they're out in the desert trying to survive. And in the desert, there are these desert creatures. There's these like desert fruits, these unnatural things. I mean, anything in the desert at this point is like deeply unnatural, because what happens is that when you eat the fruit of a desert thing, it turns you like sick in this way that calls you to the desert. Some people are just unaffected by it randomly, but there are some people also who, when they eat the food of the desert, they turn into this monstrous desert creature that grows these like lumps, and like when they die they become a plant and a tree itself that grows fruit. And so when you eat the fruit of something, it's usually just the decaying, rotting body of a human person that has turned into a plant now in the desert that bears fruit. Like, it's terrifying. Basically, it's like this desolate dystopian landscape, and there's all these myths that surround these different legends of like saints and stuff after the apocalypse. And there's a lot of like pilgrims, so people who travel to like the holy city of Las Vegas, that have the relics and the bones of these like saints that have passed, that have been known to like perform miracles or whatever to people if you go and visit them. And so our main character has a club foot, and her club foot, it feels like to her, is dragging down her and her father and like their ability to survive. They stumble upon a community of survivors, of people who are living kind of in the midst of the desert in this little town thing. And everyone there has like a brand. Not everyone, all the women and children, I think, have a brand on them, on their neck, like a cattle brand of the name of who they're like owned by almost. And so they stop by there at first. Then we get a perspective of this priest of the Holy Church of Las Vegas, like what is known as like the formal church. And he has been like excommunicated from the church because he has basically practiced heresy, which is that he has said that he can perform miracles and that he's basically like a living saint. We follow the course of these characters' lives in this incredibly brutal place to live that is almost impossible to survive through. Like, these characters have such complicated relationships with like survival and life and like having a reason to live, but also the dynamics that arise with the different people that you end up being around. And it was crazy. It was like this like Wild West outlaw type of story that was also very much a dystopian, horrifying horror novel. I was so encaptured. I thought that the writing was immersive and dynamic, and I thought that these characters were like morally ambiguous and gray in this like genuine way that didn't feel like cheap. It felt human, you know? And it was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. And the next book that I read was Untethered Sky by Fonda, which I also really liked. I rated it 4.5 stars. And it's about this girl whose whole family was killed by manticores. And there is one type of creature that you can fly that is like a big bird of prey that can kill manticores. And so she trains to become one of those flyers. And we just follow her as she pursues that and what happens as she does and the course of being a manticore hunter and killer. And I thought that it was really interesting and fun and compelling and sad and simple, but like a good time. And so yeah, I mean, maybe it's more of a 4 star than a 4.5. So the next book that I read was another novella called, I think it's a novella, yeah, High Times in the Low Parliament by Kelly Robson, which I rated 3.5 stars. I thought this book was kind of silly but also fun, and it's about this scribe who is this sort of raw lesbian who's like, I can get any girl that I want. She gets thrown into the fairies' court, basically, onto this island where no one's like allowed to leave, kinda, and she has to work for this bitch fairy who's a total cunt, and they end up having to like work together to figure something out. There's this dancer who is like French and a representative within this like house, because in the low parliament there's like all these different representatives, and it's basically like a government organization with all these fairies and representatives. And yeah, our main character has to figure out, as a scribe, like working as a scribe, figure out the basically court intrigue of it all, the political intrigue of it all, to try to like save herself. It was quirky, it was silly, and I had a good time. And the next book that I read was The Galactic Zookeeper's Guide to Heists and Husbandry by A.C. Huntley, which I rated also 3.5 stars. And look, this book was also kind of a delight. It's very much a space opera that follows this snarky and funny main character who is this woman who's like so fucking tired of living on this planet. It's a hell planet, by the way. It's like a backwater planet that only exists because of the zoo, but the zoo is very, very badly maintained, and like no one actually gives a fuck who works there. Like all of her higher management all make her life miserable because she does try to care for the animals, but they don't at all. And she's like one of the only women on the whole planet, so she faces like extreme levels of sexual harassment, and she's been forced there due to like debt, forced to stay there for like 7 years, and then she finally gets the chance to leave because her ex-boyfriend tries to loop her in onto this trafficking scheme for this umeme, which is a two-headed llama. And so it's like very rare because if you harvest its like double neck thing right after it dies, it like turns into this, it's this really, really potent like drug that's basically like Viagra or something like that. I don't fucking know. But basically the space mafia, the mob, wants a umeme. And so she's like, fuck it, I'm out of here. This is enough money to set me up for the rest of my life, and I need to leave this hell planet. And so she does. But now she's involved in this like fucking trafficking heist situation, and she doesn't know what the hell she's doing. She ends up smuggling on board this toilet delivery ship with a really hot captain guy. And so that is like a thing that happens. Yeah, we basically follow her hijinks as she like lies to everyone she encounters about why the fuck she has a new umeme, because she can't tell them that she's like trafficking it, because that's deeply illegal, and she's trying not to go to prison. She also is trying to, you know, covertly communicate with the mob boss who keeps on hitting her up and being like, how the fuck are you gonna get the umeme to us, okay? I need it now. Like, show me the umeme. Anyway, so very, very unserious but high stakes, okay? And I kept on like laughing out loud, but also being like, bitch, get your shit together. Oh my god, why are you saying this? Throughout the course of this book, because I was just like, you're really finding yourself in a lot of situations, but also she doesn't really have that many better options, so I get it, you know? I thought it was really fun and a good time. I mean, I think there were some elements that I was just like, okay, hence it being like a 3.5 star book as opposed to like being like a 4 star book, but I had a lot of fun with it, you know? And then I read this is my second to last book to talk about, by the way. So, I've been talking forever. So, yeah. This is called The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff, and I rated this book 4 stars. I liked this. I heard about this book because of Rincey Reads, and I've seen it just floating around, kind of, and it was exactly, I think, what I was told it was going to be about, but it was also kind of not what I expected, because it was less organized than I thought. Basically, The Bandit Queens is about this woman who everyone thinks that she kills her husband, but she didn't. Sorry, I had to reapply my lip gloss. My Clinique Black Honey lip gloss. I don't know where the fuck my actual Clinique Black Honey lipstick went, but that's neither here nor there. Anyways, this book is about this woman who everyone in this small Indian village thinks that she killed her husband. She did not. He just disappeared one day. He was abusive towards her, but, you know, a lot of women in this village are in situations that are like their husbands are abusive and violent misogynists and like terrible to them. The fellow village woman is like, you have experience in this, help me out. And so that's what happens. Our main character is really isolated from the rest of her community. The only reason why she has any sort of contact with like any of the other women in the community is because she's in this microfinancing loan group thing with these other women, because these like different NGOs and stuff who go to India and like try to help women with their little businesses and whatnot, like, and it's just for women. So they have their meetings and every week to, you know, put together their money and stuff. That's the only reason why she has any contact with these people. Her best friend is in this group, or her ex-best friend whom she no longer talks to, and they have like a lot of bad blood between them, is in this group as well. She's very popular and well liked in the village. And basically, this book is very funny in a very darkly comedic way. Our main character really reveres this legend of lore of this woman named the Bandit Queen, and how she escaped many different instances of abuse and rape and was like free and successful. And so our main character gets roped into trying to help these women kill their husbands, and like one by one it's a whole situation, and she's just like, I'm not a killer, like I don't know how to do this, is this even ethical, I don't know. And shit just goes down. This book is very much a interrogation of misogyny in India, casteism, how communities operate when they're like small, tight-knit, everyone knows everyone else's business, like that type of deal. And I thought that it was really, really engaging and like fun, but also really sad, and a really incisive and clear-eyed look at the reality of like a lot of women in the world and the conditions of, I mean, I don't think this story is like representative of India as a whole or like South Asians or anything, but I think like our author really committed to telling a story with a truth and authenticity that I think really shines through. And then the final book that I read in August was Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer, which I rated 3.5 stars because I thought a lot of points made here. Interesting, solid. A lot of other points, what? Or, right. Basically, this book is just about, you know, what do we do with artists who have done bad things, and the misogyny behind the spectacle of engaging with this art, like, you know, being a fan of Woody Allen films but knowing what Woody Allen has done, or, you know, what does it mean as like a woman and a survivor to have those positions and whatnot, and as a consumer. And then like approaching different artists, she sort of goes into different specific ones. She goes into like being like a mother and the ways that women exist within this continuum of like artists in the public eye and fan bases as consumers and as profit building for companies. And I don't know, I think like there are some really interesting and incisive points and other things that kept on getting referenced or talked or like, you know, Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, but you know, other things that were talked about or her perspective that sort of reflects her, like Claire Dieter's myopic and limited approach. You know, like I think there are some things in terms of how she's both self-aware but not self-aware of these things, like the way that like Trump election affected her, or like January 6th, or like the Kavanaugh hearings, or you know, like just things like that. I don't know, it's just very much like, yeah, you really are like a liberal rich white lady. And it's just it's interesting and it's funny to some extent to see her grapple and through these things and sort of like try to interrogate these ideas and approach them from, you know, her experience of being like a film critic and also just like a consumer of art and media, and a critical one at that. She like talks about like Lolita I thought that was really interesting. She talks about the Seattle band, I think, called the Power Bottoms, and like allegations that came up around that. Like she talks about such a variety of things. She talks about Wagner, I think is his name, the Nazi German composer, the guy who like was buddy with that Hitler really liked his music. And yeah, she talks about a lot of this shit and tries to answer that question of like, how do we consume this media? What should we do? And I think like it's a worthwhile question, and the way that she interrogates it is somewhat meaningful, but and it's interesting. But I don't know. Yeah. That's a book that I have more complicated feelings about, I suppose. Anyways, that is all for you today. All 21 books that I read in August. But yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books and what you've thought of them, if you have, or if any of these books sound interesting to you. Name drop them below in the comments, please. Thanks so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And hopefully I'll see you in my next video. But bye!